Once the vehicle is raised and safely supported, you're going to remove your 21mm lug nuts. Remove your hubcap. Remove your wheel. If you look right along your inner/outer tie rod end, you're going to see a jam nut right here. We're going to spray down this area with some penetrant. Then you take some nice long pliers like this, or you can use a wrench and break that nut free. There we go. Next, we're going to remove this cotter pin right here. Let's use some cutters. Remove that. After that, you remove this nut right here. We're going to remove this nut using a 19mm. Something that I like to mention real quick is it's always a good idea to replace both these inner and outer tie rod ends at the same time. There we go. Next, we're going to take our hammer and we're going to bonk right here on the knuckle. Once you see it break free, you can discontinue hammering. Now we're going to unscrew the outer tie rod end from the inner tie rod, and we're going to count how many turns. 1, 2, and so on. Okay, so I got 16. Now we need to remove the jam nut from the inner tie rod end. To do that, I'm going to use some locking pliers. Grab right onto that, and then I'm going to remove this nut right here. Alright, on there pretty good. I'm going to apply a little bit of heat to the nut, see if that'll help get it off of there. Try it again. Beautiful. Next, I'm going to use some long nose pliers, and I'm going to remove this clamp right here. Grab one of those little ears, slide it off. So I grabbed myself a nice long pry bar. You can also use a screwdriver, and I also have a hammer. If you look along this bellows boot right here, you're going to see this little metal looking tab. That's the clamp for the inside, and that's a single time use. So we're just going to break it right off. So I'm going to put my pry bar on there. Just give it a couple loving bonks till it breaks free. There it is. Now I'm going to grab my boot, give it some twists, and give it a tug at the same time. There's our bellows boot. Check it, make sure it's not torn anywhere. If it's torn or ripped, you need to replace it. This one looks great. So now I'm going to continue with my long pliers, but you could also use a specialty tool such as an inner tie rod end removal tool, and that'll just slide over this and it'll have an adapter that fits right on here perfectly. If you have something like that, good for you. If you have long pliers, also good for you. I'm just going to grab it like this, break it free, give it a couple twists here. Let's probably get a little bit of thread locker on there. There it is. Now with everything out of the way, you have a clear view of what's going on with the power steering rack. Right down along where this shaft is and it goes into the thicker portion, there should be a seal. If when you took off that boot, you happen to notice there was a lot of power steering fluid in it and it's now covering your subframe here, that means you need a new power steering rack. Okay, we've got our old inner tie rod and our new inner tie rod. We just want to make sure we've got approximately the same length here, same thread pitch. This looks great. Let's get ready for an install. It's time to install the inner tie rod end. If you have a little bit of thread locker, I would just throw a little bit on there, but we'll call it your prerogative. Okay, that's bottomed out. Now I'm going to make sure I tighten it up with those pliers. Okay. Nice and tight. We've got our little package of grease that came with the inner tie rod end. We're going to make sure we put that right inside this joint right here. Just squeeze a whole bunch of it in. I like to save a little bit, and I'll show you why in a second. But we definitely want to make sure that this whole joint is nice and coated. Keep all the moisture out of there. Now I'm going to continue on with this grease. I'm going to go right up along this lip right here. That's where the bellows boot's going to ride, and also where the clamp's going to be. And that's going to make it easier for the alignment professional. There we go. Beautiful. So to replace the single-use clamp, I'm going to use something as simple as a wire tie. I'm just going to take my bellows boot, go right around the wide end. I'm going to make it so it's just barely touching. That looks good. I'll trim off a little bit of the excess so I can get it in there. Now I'm just going to take this boot, slide it on till it goes over the power steering rack right along here. Once it is, we'll grab this with some long nose pliers and snug it right up. Okay, that slides right into its groove. I love it. I'm going to go over the other side and I'm going to straighten out the wheel. Just going to give this a little spin, get it up onto the power steering rack. That looks great. I can see the wire tie in there. I'm just going to grab my long nose pliers, grab onto it, just give it a little twist like that. Once it's fully tightened, it'll just break right off like that. That feels good. Give it a tug. It's definitely not coming off the power steering rack. I'm going to move along to this clamp right here. Just grab those little ears, give them a squeeze. Slide it right over the inner tie rod end and up onto that bellows boot. That looks good. I'm just going to give it another look just to make sure the boot is on the power steering rack the whole way around. Beautiful. I'm going to take a tiny bit of never seize. Just go right along the threaded area of that inner tie rod end. Take my new jam nut. Put it right up on here. We're going to install our outer tie rod end. Just going to make sure the wheel's straight up there, and then I'm going to try to get this as straight as possible and just try to make sure that that's aligned. Whether or not you counted taking off the outer tie rod end, sometimes even though you counted, it can still be off and your wheel might be turned something like this or like that. So just get this as straight as possible with the vehicle, make sure the wheel's in the straight position, and then line this up with that. Let's insert the outer into the knuckle. We've got our washer and our nut. I'm just going to bottom that out. Now we'll torque this to manufacturer's specifications. Let's torque this to 25 foot-pounds. Torqued. We've got our jam nut. Make sure you turn that in so it's up against the tie rod, and then make sure you snug it up. There we are. Now I'm just going to straighten out the tie rod so it's parallel with the ground. That looks pretty great. Now it's time to get our wheel up on here. Lift it up. Grab your hubcap. You've got your little valve stem hole. Line it up with the valve stem. Lug nut. Let's torque these lug nuts to 83 foot-pounds. Torqued. Okay, so now that you finished your repair, it's important to make sure that you get your car safely down to a reputable local alignment shop.